Minister confirm that should Netanyahu, who faces an ICC arrest warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity, enter UK territory, he will be immediately arrested? Yes or no?
He set out on the 2nd of September how the suspension of armed licences would apply to direct sale of F-35 components to Israel, but not to the global supply chain.
So when will the government move to sanction them as part of a wider package of further action to uphold international law?
Despite what the Minister has said, last week at the Royal Courts of Justice, the government conceded that UK-made F-35 parts could be used in violations of international law in Gaza and admitted that Israel has shown no commitment to upholding these legal obligations. Despite this, the government has continued to authorise offensive F-35 arms exports, exposing itself to criminal liability. It's disappointing that the Foreign Secretary isn't here today, so will the Minister let our constituents know if the government will end its complicity in genocide, impose sanctions and end all arms sales? And will the Minister confirm that should Netanyahu, who faces an ICC arrest warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity, enter UK territory, he will be immediately arrested? Yes or no?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll return briefly to the statement made by the Foreign Secretary on the 2nd of September. Suspending all licences for the F-35 programme would undermine the global F-35 supply chain that is vital for the security of the UK, our allies and NATO. He set out on the 2nd of September how the suspension of armed licences would apply to direct sale of F-35 components to Israel, but not to the global supply chain. That continues to be the position.
Does the Minister agree with me that one of the greatest tools that we have against tyranny anywhere is that, friend or foe, rich or poor, elected or unelected, the law applies to everybody, and the universality of certain crimes means that they can be prosecuted anywhere?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I hope I've made clear this afternoon, this government is committed to the international rule of law and will continue to be so.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I thought the Conservative Party styled itself as the party of law and order, but that's increasingly not the case when it comes to international law, it seems. The government is right to uphold the decision of the ICC, and it was right to vote for the UN Security Council motion on a ceasefire last week. The Minister will be aware that there is increasing evidence of forcible displacement of Palestinians from the north of Gaza, including from organisations such as Human Rights Watch. He will be aware that this is a crime against humanity, and that two of the main proponents of this are Israeli Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. The Prime Minister has confirmed that the government is looking at this, so when will the government move to sanction them as part of a wider package of further action to uphold international law?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We follow reports from northern Gaza closely and with concern, and have raised many of these issues repeatedly. As I've said already, I won't comment further on sanctions, but that I wish to be clear that forced displacement of Palestinians outside of Gaza is not consistent with Israel's obligations.
The Minister has assured us that the arrest warrants will be carried out, and I hope that is the case. Could he also consider that if an arrest warrant has been issued for the leader of a country, if the International Court of Justice has found it deeply wanting on its behaviour and as an occupying power and the war crimes that have been committed, why are we still supplying weapons that are taking part in the bombardment of Gaza that are destroying life as we speak?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I said in answer to a question from my own benches, we took steps on the 2nd of September to ensure that, with one exemption, which I'm happy to go into, that we are not selling arms which are being used, which could pose a breach of international humanitarian law in Gaza, and that continues to be the position, and it is kept under regular review.
I welcome the decision by the ICC, and I sincerely hope that we will live up to our international obligations if the Prime Minister of Israel visits the UK. You have said yourself that you regret the fact that more aid isn't getting into Gaza and that you've been calling out the Israeli government for not letting more aid in. Is it not time now to do more than just calling out the Israeli government and telling them how angry you are? Isn't it time now that you end all arms exports to Israel, that you impose sanctions, end trade with all the illegal settlements and recognise Palestine as a state?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will continue to press these points with vigour, and we will continue to keep all of the other measures under review, as I've said already in this chamber.
Can I say I'm truly perplexed? No doubt most of the British population that's watching this debate will be truly perplexed by some of the arguments that are being advanced. Issues when it comes to the ICC, topics such as morality or equivalence, don't feature. This is a principle of law. An independent body encapsulating some of the most senior members of the judiciary have made a finding. And yet we have issues of democracy or morality being used as some sort of impunity against leaders. Will the Minister state that if Benjamin Netanyahu arrived on these shores, even if the ICC have issued warrants, would we at least detain him subject to our domestic procedures?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the member makes a impassioned and welcome commitment to due process and the independence of the law, and I won't demur from that by providing commentary on what domestic courts might do in a hypothetical situation.
Can I just say to my honourable friend, I say this as constructively as I possibly can, but a number of us have sat here for a number of months and questions have been asked about sanctions, and the response from ministers is that we cannot comment on sanctions in the House. Can I say that renders sanctions ineffective? In addition to that, it breaks down the accountability of ministers to this House as well, and we deserve a better statement than that. Can I also ask him on the legal process itself? He's quite right, he said we will respect international law, we will comply with the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction and decisions. And he said it will be for the, if I get the wording right, it will be for the domestic legal processes involved. Where does physical arrest come within that domestic legal process?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me deal with the question of why we don't provide advance comment on sanctions, and then I'll turn, if I may, to the question about the domestic legal process. So, I hear my right honourable friend. The reason we do not provide commentary on sanctions is that to do so in advance would reduce their effect. I think, and I have my colleague sat next to me, but I would think that we have issued probably upwards of 50, maybe even 100 sanctions in the short time that we've been the government. There has been no shortage of sanctions for this House to comment on. I recognise the two that I've been pressed on the most this afternoon are of intense political interest. But despite their intense political interest, were we to prejudge sanctions and trail them in this House before we made them, we would reduce their impact. The same is true of the hundreds of sanctions that we have done on Russia over the years, and it would be the same in every forum. In relation to the domestic legal process, I hope my right honourable friend will forgive me for not entering too deeply into hypotheticals about how we might, how a court might discharge its findings on these matters.
I welcome the government's commitment to uphold its obligations under international law, and therefore to commit to issuing arrest warrants to these men if they step foot on British soil. But I do ask the Minister, if the government acknowledges that the Prime Minister of Israel should be on trial for war crimes and crimes against humanity, how, morally and legally, can we continue to supply him with the weapons which are being used by Israel in its horrific assault on innocent civilians in Gaza?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've outlined our position both in relation to our international and domestic obligations to the ICC, and I've outlined the position on arms sales. I can reassure my honourable friends that we consider the findings of the ICC in the ongoing review process in relation to arms sales.
I'm frankly astonished at the principle underlining some of the comments made by the Shadow Foreign Secretary and some of her Conservative colleagues today. I've been giving assemblies to primary school children across Early and Woodley constituency, emphasising that British democracy means that nobody is above the rule of law. Yeah. I hope that one day the members of the Conservative Party opposite might understand what the children of Early and Woodley constituency instinctively understand, which is that we should be equal above the law, whether or not we are the political leaders of a democracy or otherwise. And that is why I welcome the Minister's statement that the government will comply with its international obligations. Now, the Minister has set out the work he has been doing in travelling to the region and in witnessing firsthand the blockage of aid by the Israeli government into Gaza. The United Nations states that over 83% of food aid has been blocked. And of course, this leads to the risk, an ongoing fact of starvation in the region. So I ask the Minister what he can do, what the government can do, in line with our positive obligation under international law to prevent future atrocities occurring in Gaza.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government is deeply concerned by the latest IPC finding about the situation in relation to food insecurity in Gaza. We are making efforts to try and ensure that a more rapid and regular flow of aid, including items that have been barred. Those items that have been barred seem to particularly often be the items most vital for winterization, as the international humanitarian community call it, in Gaza, and we will continue to press for more flexibility on these points, so the necessary tents, sleeping bags and other equipment required to safeguard Palestinian life over the course of the winter is able to move in at the scale that is required.
43,000 dead, possibly 100,000 under the rubble. Schools, hospitals destroyed, and 16,000 children killed, including by drones and shot in the head. Many of my members and honourable friends have mentioned that this was a genocide mentioned many months ago. Now that the ICC prosecutor has called Benjamin Netanyahu a serious war criminal, a potential serious war criminal and committing crimes against humanity, does the Minister agree with me that it is now the time to recognise the State of Palestine and all military and financial cooperation with the Israeli government, while its leaders are essentially international fugitives?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I won't rehearse our position on the recognition of the State of Palestine other than to say we believe that the Palestinians have an inalienable right to a state alongside a safe and secure Israel, and as part, this government hopes to take steps to advance that as part of a contribution to a two-state solution.
It is crucial that the Labour government must comply with our obligations under international law to uphold the ICC's ruling and enforce the arrest warrants against Israeli ministers. This compliance is vital, given the previous Conservative government's besmirching of the International Criminal Court and in turn damaging the UK's standing on the world stage. Many of my constituents in Wokingham would like to see that the UK stands up for what is right and would like to see that the UK does not turn its back on international law. So will the Secretary of State confirm that the government will not undermine the ICC's ruling by unequivocally agreeing to uphold the arrest warrants?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to reassure the honourable member and ask him to pass on to his constituents that this government will indeed do the right thing and stand up for international law, and I've set out the manner in which we would do that over the course of this afternoon.